I was working in the lab late one night when my eyes beheld an eerie sight. A classic movie monster has returned to the cinema screen. The Invisible Man sees Australian filmmaker Leigh Whannell deliver a new work offering a modern take on the traditional Invisible Man narrative. Starring Elisabeth Moss, the film uses classic monster movie tropes and fuses them to examine the residual trauma stemming from an abusive and controlling ex-partner. It's an engrossing, relevant and effective update on the classic science fiction horror narrative.
Are you okay?
Someone's sitting in that chair.
The character of the Invisible Man first appeared in the H.G. Wells novel, which was published in the late 1800s. And for a character that you can't actually see, he has had many different on-screen incarnations. From Kevin Bacon's scenery-chewing performance in The Hollow Man to Chevy Chase's dour turn in the early 90s box office bomb Memoirs of an Invisible Man.
Taxi! Can you take me to San Francisco?
The most notable Invisible Man, however, was actually the first. Played by British actor Claude Rains, who would go on to star in such epic films as Casablanca and Lawrence of Arabia, Rains' iconic performance in the 1933 version of The Invisible Man remains the best.
I'll show you who I am!
The film was directed by James Whale, along with filmmakers such as Todd Browning and performers Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff and Lon Chaney Jr. Whale was a key figure in the creation of the classic Universal Monsters series of films, which would change the horror film genre forever.
It's alive!
Drawing inspiration from horror literature and the German silent expressionistic films such as Nosferatu, from the early 1920s through to the 1950s, Universal Pictures produced a number of genre pictures that would introduce the world to a slew of iconic monster characters.
There he is!
As interest began to wane in the late 1940s and early 1950s, the introduction of popular Universal comedic duo Abbott and Costello in such films as Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein and many other subsequent monstrous misadventures saw audiences become immune to the thrills and chills of the genre, and the monster movie all but vanished from the silver screen.
I like that! Like this! All right, put your hands down.
But you can't keep a good monster down. Over in the UK, a company known as Hammer Film Productions produced a host of gothic horror films from the mid-1950s well into the 1970s. Peppered with more violence and adult content to reinvigorate audience interest, Hammer produced many fantastic horror films, but their biggest gift to the world of cinema was Christopher Lee's recurring role as Count Dracula.
I am Dracula, and I welcome you to my house.
Over the course of 3 decades, Lee starred as the Count in 9 different movies and, in my opinion, is, and always will be, the best on-screen Dracula. Back in Hollywood, however, monsters were still being treated as a punchline. Films such as the stop-motion animation comedy Mad Monster Party, along with George Hamilton's Love at First Bite,
Good evening.
and Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein all presented their ghouls for laughs rather than screams. It would take until the 1990s for a monster movie to regain its bite. Released in 1992, Francis Ford Coppola's rendition of Bram Stoker's Dracula wowed audiences and critics upon release. The film's impressive gothic production design and striking costumes, along with a stellar ensemble cast, proved to be a genre game changer and rekindled audiences' love for classic monster narratives.
They say you are a man of good taste.
For the next few years to capitalise on this newfound interest, a massive number of monster movies followed. From Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, to the Mummy Adventure series, all the way to the rock star aesthetics of Dracula 2000. It was the laughably bad combo of Hugh Jackman's Van Helsing and Benicio del Toro's 2010 reboot of The Wolfman, which saw audiences once again turn their backs on the creatures of the night.
Terrible things, Lawrence. You've done terrible things.
But that wasn't the final nail in the coffin. Given the recent popularity of superhero franchises such as the Avengers, in 2017 Universal Pictures attempted to create a shared cinematic universe collectively pairing all the classic Universal monsters in a series of interconnected films. It was to be called the Dark Universe, with the first film launching the project being The Mummy, starring Tom Cruise. Whilst the film had a certain B-grade charm, it was a commercial and critical disaster and single-handedly killed all future Dark Universe projects, proving the point once and for all that not even Tom Cruise can outrun the Mummy.
Hold on. So Where does that leave me?
Rising from the ashes of the Dark Universe, the 2020 update of The Invisible Man is a step in the right direction and shows us that these classic monsters that have been around from the very early days of cinema have always offered storytellers a constantly evolving framework to explore our deepest and darkest fears. To put it another way, although cinematic monsters have been around for almost 100 years, the Monster Mash is just getting started.